Welcome to this masterclass on world building as a structured process. Let me start with a question most writers never ask themselves directly. Where does your world live? It is not in the notes you made before you started writing. It is not in the map you drew on a legal pad. It is not in the chapters of backstory you wrote and then wisely cut. The real question is this: where does your world live for the reader? And the answer is simple: in the story. Only in the story. Specifically, in the moments when a character moves through their world and the world pushes back. That is the central idea this class is built around. World building is not what you construct before the story begins. It is what the reader believes is there. And the reader builds that belief through experience, not through description. Today we will explore the core ideas that form a complete approach to world building as a craft discipline. What world building actually is, and what it is not. How it arrives through character experience rather than exposition. What makes a world feel real versus constructed? And the friction model that gives you a practical tool for delivering world on the page. Let us begin with a definition precise enough to be useful. World building is not the construction of a setting. A setting provides location, atmosphere, and visual texture. World building goes further. It establishes the rules, the pressures, and the internal logic that make the story's world feel like a place that exists, whether or not anyone is watching it. The most common world-building failure is excess. The writer, having spent considerable effort constructing their world, feels obligated to deliver it to the reader in full. The result is the info dump. Long passages of description and backstory that halt the story while the writer arranges the furniture. Here is the principle that corrects that instinct. World-building is not what you put in. It is what you make the reader believe is there. A world the reader believes in does not need to be fully described. It needs to be internally consistent. It needs to be sensorially specific. And it needs to be emotionally logical enough that the reader's imagination fills the rest. Your job is not to complete the world on the page. Your job is to give the reader enough that they complete it in their mind. This brings us to the second core idea: world as revelation. The most effective world building arrives the way great character work arrives. Incrementally, through experience. Exactly when the reader needs it. The alternative is world building as installation. The writer establishes the world before the story starts, then populates it with characters and events. This sequence feels logical from the writer's side, but it is almost always the wrong choice for the reader's experience. A reader who has not yet been given a character to care about has no frame for the world being described. The orbital platform, the medieval village, the crumbling Victorian estate. Without a consciousness moving through it, any of these is just information. The reader files it and waits for the story to start. World as revelation means the world arrives through a character's experience of it, scene by scene, precisely when the reader needs it. There are 3 reasons this approach works so well. First, it keeps the story moving. No world building stops the narrative, because no world building is separate from it. Second, it filters the world through a consciousness the reader already trusts. Third, it is more efficient than it appears. A character moving through a space delivers enormous world without a single paragraph of description. That third point is worth pausing on. Consider a character who notices the smell of machine oil on a spaceport concourse. A character who reflexively checks the entry points of every room. A character who haggles over hull plate specifications in a dialect the reader only half understands. That character has delivered an enormous amount of world without a single dedicated description passage. This is why science fiction readers are a useful model for thinking about world-building economy. A science fiction reader who encounters an orbital platform, a faster-than-light drive, or a colony ship already knows what these things mean. Not because the writer explained them, but because years of reading the genre have constructed a shared vocabulary. The writer who stops to explain what an orbital platform is has broken a contract. The implicit agreement that this reader and this writer share a language. Now let us turn to the most practical tool in this entire class, the friction model. The most efficient world-building delivery mechanism is friction. Friction is the resistance a character encounters when they move through their world. A character who moves frictionlessly through their environment tells the reader almost nothing about that environment. A character who bumps against it tells the reader everything. A character who navigates its rules and customs. Who is shaped by its pressures and constrained by its systems. That character delivers world with every step. The friction model has 5 components. Not all are required in every story, Not all need to arrive early. But across the full manuscript, a world that registers on all 5 axes will feel inhabited rather than constructed. The first component is time. Not just the calendar date, but the historical moment. What has just happened? What is about to happen? What pressures the era places on the people living in it? The second component is place. Not just geography, but sensory identity. The smell of the harbor, the quality of the light, the sound that fills the silence when no one is speaking. The third component is culture. The norms, the rituals, and the hierarchies that characters take for granted. The things they do not need to explain to each other, but which the reader perceives through their behavior. The fourth component is institutional systems. Law, commerce, religion, government. The structures that shape what characters can and cannot do. And the fifth component is the character's specific relationship to all of the above. This is the component writers most often skip. A character who belongs to the dominant culture experiences it differently than one who is marginal to it. A character who trusts the institutional systems navigates them differently than one who has been burned by them. The friction is not just between the character and the world in the abstract. It is between this character and this world. When you build friction across all 5 components, your world stops feeling like a stage set. It starts feeling like a place that existed before the story began and will continue after it ends. Now let us talk about structure. There are 2 primary structural approaches to delivering a world. The first is micro to macro. The story begins in a specific, immediate, local experience. A room, a street, a particular morning. The world expands outward only as the story requires it. The reader learns the world the way the focus character moves through it, from the ground up. This approach is natural for literary fiction, contemporary realism, and any story where the protagonist's immediate experience is the primary lens. It keeps the reader anchored in specific, felt reality before the larger world comes into view. The second approach is macro to micro. The story opens with scope. The reader is given a sense of the larger world before the immediate story takes hold. Epic fantasy and hard science fiction most often use this approach, because the scale and strangeness of the world is part of the genre contract with the reader. The risk of macro to micro is the installation problem we discussed earlier. Even a macro opening must be filtered through a specific consciousness. It cannot be delivered as a geography lesson. Here is a useful illustration of a macro opening that works. The reader is placed in the consciousness of a soldier surveying a burning city from a ridge. The world is large. The reader knows, in a single moment, that this is a world at war, that this character has survived something, and that the scale of what has happened is enormous. All of that world arrived through one character looking at one fire. That is the principle in action. Even when the scope is vast, the delivery is intimate. Even when the world is strange, the consciousness is specific. So let us bring this together. World building is not pre-construction. It is revelation. It does not live in your notes. It lives in the reader's belief. It arrives through a character moving through a place, encountering friction, and being shaped by what they encounter. You do not need to deliver the whole world. You need to deliver enough specific, sensory, emotionally logical detail that the reader's imagination completes the rest. When you sit down to write, stop asking what the reader needs to know about your world. Start asking what your character is bumping against in this scene. What rule are they navigating? What pressure are they feeling? What custom are they observing or violating? Answer those questions, and the world will arrive on the page without ever stopping the story. That is world building as a structured process. Not installation, revelation. Not description, friction. Not what you put in, what the reader believes is there.